everybody, welcome back to this tutorial about frames per second and slow motion. This is the tutorial number 2, and this tutorial we are going to go deeper into the theory behind frames per second, so we kind of understand the things about frames per second. I want to remind you really quick about the next tutorial will be about QuickTime Player Pro. You know, QuickTime Player Pro can be super nice to use. And we are going to, in tutorial number 4, we are going to have a look at the video shot with the Canon 7D, and we're going to slow down 50 and 60 frames per second shot, and we're going to do that with the QuickTime Pro 7, and we are going to slow down with iMovie, GoPro Cineform, we're going to slow down with After Effects and Premiere Pro. And then in tutorial number 5, we are going to slow down video shot done with the GoPro Hero 3 Black Edition. As you can see, this Black Edition can do filming with frames all the way up to 240 frames per second, and that's super cool. And again, we're going to do that in all this software, but right now we are going to go deeper into the theory behind frames per second. So this first video shot here is a classical slow motion thing, you know. It's a colibri, it's a bird with the wings going very fast, and when you film that with many frames per second and slow down, you really see this smooth movement of the wings. I think with this screen recording, maybe the slow motion will not be super smooth because of the frames per second in the video recording, but I think you understand what I mean. And if we have a look at the next slide here, this is a short video I want to show you. If you see here, this is a bird. I made a drawing, and then you maybe understand I made this drawing on several of the paper of this here, and as you can see, I'm sure about that everybody have made one of these earlier years, and you know, when you present pictures drawn like this after each other, you then get an animation. And the reason why I show you this is that this really is explain what one frame is, and this picture here is in fact one frame, and how many of those you present in 1 second is frames per second. So if we then go to the next slide and have a look here, here is the reason why I have this eye for the cover here is because all this talk about the frames is much also about how fast our eye kind of works, how fast our eye see the world. It's not correctly true to, you know, say that the eye have directly frames per second, because I think the eye have different frames per second, depends on the light. If it's a brighter light, I think it's have faster frames per second. I also think if you see some danger, maybe a lion or something coming against you, I think you have different frames per second depending on what you see. So, but in total, if you present picture after each other in 25, 24, 25, around there frames per second or more, then the eye will see this as a smooth movement. So that's really nice to know that when you are doing slow motion and things like that, I think it's a really good rule that you don't go lower than 24, 25 frames per second. But why did I have done this drawing? Yes, as you can see here, this is a kind of illustration of a shot in 1 second, and this have 25 frames. So then the eye see this one frame there, and the next frame there, and the frame number 3, and then when the eye put this together, this is a slow movement. So then the clip under, as you can see here, you will understand later on why I have all this number. You cannot see all of them, but as you can see here, if you have a 50 frames per second shot done with a Canon 7D, for instance, or done with a GoPro Hero 3 Black Edition, you can see that if you have 50 frames per second presented in 1 second, you have kind of too much frames. You don't need all the frames because the eye see those 2 frames in the same time. So the thing is that the big secret here, what happened if we take this and present it in 2 seconds instead of 1 second? So then I'm going to go out of the presentation mode. So that's the really cool thing about this illustration, that when you take 25 frames per second and draw it out to 2 seconds, what's happened then? Yes, then we get, for sure, we get a half frames per second presented, and this is 12.5 frames per second. And that's when the problem come, because then the eye see 1 frame 2 times. So then you have kind of not a smooth slow motion. But if you have done the video shot, the original shot done in 50 or 60 frames per second, and you take this 1 second shot and present it in 2 seconds, okay, up here, there you can see that this 50 frames per second now is presented in 2 seconds, and if you see how many frames per second we have now, we have then 25 frames per second. So this is the big kind of a big thing to understand with the slow motion. So the reason I have this QuickTime Player 7 thing under here, that we will later on have a close look at how we can in fact do this manually in QuickTime Player Pro number 7. Okay, we go back to the presentation mode, and we are going to follow this thing a little bit. Here's back to the bird again, and I did some thing with this video shot. I speeded it up 4 times. So if we play it now, it's kind of almost real speed, not exactly real speed, but it's faster. As you can see, we have some frame problem here because of the filming of the screen at the same times, but I think you understand. So the thing I did with this shot here, that I speeded it up 4 times and rendered it out with 25 or 30, I don't remember exactly, but I rendered it out with 25 or 30 frames per second, and I slowed it down again. And why did I do that? Yes, because I want to show you some things that it's kind of important to have the control over. If you see of those 2 video shots here, that's one of them have more frames than the other, and I can say to you that this one have more frames than this one. We can try to play it again. That's the strange part, that it's kind of a little bit difficult to see it with our own eyes, because our eyes have a tendency to fill in what's not there. But if we go to the next shot, I'm going to show you. This is really fun, I think, because I took it frame by frame. So then you can see that the left shot has, with the wing, is going more, have more frames. So you can see if we count between the wings here, we can count 4 times. So as you can see, it's not so many frames in this right picture here. I go back again so we can kind of count. Okay, one moment, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So as you remember, I speeded it up 4 times and I slowed it down 4 times again. So why do I talk about this? Yes, because as you can see, this slow down with the 25 frames per second give us not a good slow motion. So that's kind of this situation with the right picture here. As you can see, this don't have as many frames per second as the left shot. So this left shot is kind of equal to the shot in the bottom here. Later on in tutorial number 3, I mean, you will see that we will explain how to reveal the fake slow motion are all the frames there? Why do we ask ourselves about that? Yes, we ask ourselves about that because in some editors, they don't tell you is it real slow motion or is it not. I remember early versions of iMovie. When you imported movie clips, it took away half of the frame. If you imported for instance 50 or 60 frames per second shot, it took away half of the frames, and then when you slowed it down, it wasn't a real slow motion. So this is a more extreme way to show this kind of problem if you don't have enough frames per second. This is a 50 frames per second shot, and I've done it 10 times slower, and the final result is 5 frames per second. And as you can see here, this is kind of a horrible slow motion. And the reason for that, if we go back again to this here, is that the eye kind of see the same frames several times. So if you then see a shot done with 240 frames per second, then slowed down 10 times, then we have the final result of 24 frames per second. So again, in my opinion, as you can see there, this is really smooth slow motion. So in my opinion, I think if you want to slow things down, it's kind of important to have control over how the source file, how many frames per second you have there, and be sure about you don't slow it down too much. So this is so interesting with new cameras. If you see on the right hand side here, first you have the 7D, you have the possibility to film in 1280 times 720 in 50 or 60 frames. This is the PAL setup, but if you have a NTSC setup with 60 frames per second, you have the same option. So here on the Hero 3, you have a lot of choices of frames per second. So I think it's kind of nice to have knowledge about the frames per second. Then you can kind of decide how fast you want to film. You know, 1920 times 1080 is a really nice resolution to film in, so then you know that you can do that in all the way up to 60 frames per second. But if you want a really slow motion, you can even do it all the way up to 240 frames per second. But as you can see there, not the same screen resolution. So then maybe 120 or 100 frames per second can also be a really nice option. So again, you know, when you're doing editing when you are doing editing in half speed, you know, it's kind of easy. But when you're going up to 120 or 100 or 240 or different frames per second, it's kind of hard to know how to control the slow motion. So that is what we are going to have a look at in later tutorials. But now just a really short slide about why 25 frames per second and why 30 frames per second. That's from the older TV system, and that was the PAL, is the European system, and 30 frames per second is the NTSC system. And if you want to know more about that, I think Wikipedia can be a really nice thing. And one of the reasons is that Europe have 50 hertz in the current in the power supply system, and then 25 frames per second is half of the 50 hertz. And the same in the United States, 60 hertz is the double of the 30 frames per second. And why 29.97 frames per second? That's because when they introduced the color, then they needed to put it somewhere and get it synchronized. They took down the frames per second down to 29.97 7 frames per second. But if you want to know more about that, I recommend you to go to Wikipedia. In fact, no big need for that. But that was the end of this tutorial. I really hope you want to be back for the next tutorial, where we are going to go deeper into QuickTime Player 7 Pro. We are going to have a look at the user interface. There is a really nice software if you are doing anything of video, because QuickTime Player 7 Pro is a really fast software to do fast editing. You know, you can do the slow motion directly in there, and you have some information with using the QuickTime 7 Pro. So I hope you will follow me there. And then later on we are going to, in the tutorial number 4, doing slow motion Canon 7D, and then in tutorial number 5, slow motion even all the way up to 240 frames per second, and do it in QuickTime Player Pro, iMovie, GoPro, Cineform, After Effects and Premiere Pro. So I hope we'll be back. Okay, I almost forgot to tell you that at yetanothersolution.blogspot.com you can also download some source file if you want to. We have a windsurfer in 50 frames per second, a cross-country clip in 240 frames per second. You know, if you have your own clip, it's for sure you use that, but if you need some clips with enough frames per second, maybe you want to buy a camera or something, I'm wondering about how do my editing system works, you can just download it here. And you can also download this slow motion convert table, who I'm going to talk more in detail about later on. Okay, then see you back later in tutorial number 3.